right. Hi, everybody. My name is Paper. Paper is short for paperficwriter, which is my nom de plume for fan fiction. And that is what I'm going to talk to you all about today. So paperficwriter is the name that I've been writing under for roughly the last 5 years. I've actually written fan fiction off and on throughout my entire life. My first foray to fan fiction was a crossover of The Lion King, Cocoon, and Dragonheart. So yeah, was starting off with some craziness there. And then I moved into Star Wars and took a very long break. And now I write a lot that is based off of popular anime series. But today I'm going to be talking about fan fiction kind of in general, and the sometimes sensational world of transformative fiction. So what I want to talk about first is what a lot of people think of when they think about fan fiction. So first of all, a lot of people think, in kind of the most basic sense, they think about sort of cringy stories about, what if I were Batman's secret girlfriend and he relied on me for emotional support while being the brooding hero of Gotham, which a lot of people are kind of like, oh, that's like super cringy, without actually thinking beyond just like what the topic is at hand. And there is plenty of fan fiction out there, but it's still a completely valid form of creative expression. You also have kind of the opposite side of that, where a lot of people think about fan fiction as sort of the weird sexual stuff. Everybody knows 50 Shades of Grey, and one of the popular talking points about that book is the fact that it started as Twilight fan fiction, where the characters were put into a more sexually charged relationship that went on to be a huge New York Times bestseller and became very popular with what people perceive as middle-aged women at home. And that was kind of a big perspective that people kept. Most recently in reporting, there has also been talk about the feud in Wolf Kink Erotica, which let's just go on ahead and take a look at that headline for what it is. And as soon as people start reading about, oh, this is about a fan fiction trope in which people exhibit traits of outdated wolf studies of alpha, betas, and omegas, and anybody can get pregnant, people tend to kind of have a reaction of, whoa, that's really weird. And then we kind of move forward from that. People also have really skewed perspectives of who writes fan fiction. People tend to think of like kind of the obsessed fanboys. People think of bronies, which, I mean, we've been talking about for as long as it seems like the new iteration of My Little Pony has been around. The, grown men who have been obsessed with the series. A lot of people have kind of seen that as sort of an aspect of fandom, or the fan kingdom. That's what it's a portmanteau of, fandom. A lot of people kind of obsess about that perspective. And even at its most core, a lot of people just think of fan fiction as something that usually teenage girls will write, and share with one another, without actually really going further than that and understanding that there are a lot of people of a lot of different ages and a lot of different backgrounds who do write fan fiction. And I'm going to be talking about that. But first, let's actually take a step back and talk about what is fan fiction in its most basic form. Merriam-Webster, yes, the dictionary, defines fan fiction as stories involving popular fictional characters that are written by fans and often posted on the internet. So for a lot of people, very basically put, fan fiction is playing in somebody else's sandbox. It's using characters from movies, television, video games, animated series, pretty much anything you could think of, and putting them into different situations, sometimes creating entirely different worlds that popular characters or characters that people love and have attached themselves to um, can live in and interact with. Fan fiction actually started most popularly with the Star Trek fandom, going all the way back to when that series started becoming popular. Fan fiction would actually be printed into small publications known as zines and be exchanged at conventions. Then, as the internet started becoming a part of our day to day lives, websites were created that would host fan fiction. Fanfiction.net, LiveJournal. Now we have Wattpad. Tumblr is still a good source for fan fiction. And then you have AO3. AO3 stands for Archive of Our Own, which is arguably the most popular place to post fan fiction. And this website, actually, the goal of it is to make fan fiction not only accessible, but also to protect people who write fan fiction from unfair DMCAs. So, speaking of which, who actually writes fan fiction? You do have young and inexperienced writers who get their start writing fan fiction and move on to write original work. A lot of writers do get their start in fan fiction. A lot more writers are starting to come out about that and, really own their fan fiction background. Some fan fiction writers even go on to do what is called filing off the serial numbers with their fan fiction. What that means is that they'll take out the copywritten portions of their fan fiction and publish it as original work. Because a lot of the work that goes into fan fiction completely transforms what we see as the original work. So people do use that for new creative works that are their own intellectual property. You do also have passionate fans, especially now that we have media that's often either sanitized, lacking in diversity, or made to appeal to specific demographics. Fan fiction provides a way to transform characters and worlds to kind of fill in those gaps. So a lot of times fan fiction has a lot more flavor sometimes than the original source material. People all over the world write fan fiction. This is not just an American or Western activity. Oftentimes, fan fiction writers can suffer persecution and censorship, especially recently. There was a whole issue where Archive of Our Own was completely banned in China after certain fan fiction was deemed inappropriate. So, I mean, fan fiction is a big source of debate in many countries. Probably most importantly, however, is the marginalized groups who write fan fiction. LGBTQIA plus, people of color, kink and sex positive communities, trauma victims. These are all examples of people who write fan fiction. Many people use fan fiction as a means to either cope or to address their own years of either abuse or oppression. And that's something that's really important about fan fiction, is being able to take topics that people have dealt with or internalized and then kind of work through them in fiction and to share that art with others. So, genres of fan fiction. I'm going to use a very popular topic of fan fiction. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Re-envisioned versions of this IP and using Sherlock Holmes. First, you have what's considered gen fan fiction, which is general fan fiction. That is, character relationships usually aren't at the forefront. It's really just kind of expanding on the story and sometimes like showing friendships and showing different ways that the world works outside of the source material. Now, you do have smut and not safe for work. This refers to adult content that varies in levels of extreme. This is a hot topic in fandom circles because some people are anti smut and some people are very sex positive. I write in very sex positive circles, and I'd like to let people know in case they look up my username and are surprised by what they find. Then you have ships and shippy stories. This comes from the word relationships, and these are stories depicting characters usually in romantic interactions and their relationships. And finally, you have alternative universes. These are known as AUs, and really anything goes. So this is when maybe you say, like, a really popular trope is these two characters from a series work in a coffee shop together and they fall in love. Okay. But alternative universes, really anything goes. So some of the common misconceptions of fan fiction. First of all, fan fiction's weird. All fiction's weird. That's what makes fiction good. The biggest rule of fan fiction is and always will be don't like, don't read. You do not have to like everything. You do not have to appreciate everything. But, it is important to remember that the people who write fan fiction are real people who deserve to be treated fairly. Fan fiction isn't real writing. This is a demeaning gatekeeping tactic used to undermine creative individuals. As I mentioned on the last slide, some of your favorite IPs are fan fiction. They're based off of previous IPs. And the thing to remember is that all stories have been told. At the very basic bottom of it, all stories have been told. All stories are just reimaginings of other stories, which makes fan fiction just as much of a valid art form as anything else. And the fan fiction community must be really cool to everyone in it. If everybody's kind of a little bit weird writing fan fiction, everybody must be cool with each other. Not so much. Fandom drama is real, and there can be a lot of a lot of drama and a lot of puritanical thought policing that comes into fan fiction. Just because one person who writes fan fiction doesn't mean that they are a representation of that fandom. It doesn't mean that what they write is readily accepted. There is a lot of an atmosphere right now where people are trying to encourage others to enjoy fiction without feeling like that is a direct representation of their real life morals and values. And that's why it's just really, at the end of the day, we come back to that rule. You don't like it, you don't have to read it. So what can you do, especially if you don't read fan fiction? You can provide support to people who do. You can just, be cool with people who do write fan fiction. You can also disengage from people who think that making fun of fan fiction writers and other creators that matter is funny. We've seen YouTube videos where people have been like, oh, we're going to read some fan fiction. I can't imagine how terrible that must be to hear your fan fiction read by people who are obviously making fun of it. If you wouldn't do that with any other art form, don't do it with people who write fan fiction. Curate your own online experience. Again, if you come across fan fiction that you don't appreciate or that doesn't resonate with you, you can block that person. You can avoid reading future content from that author, but it's your responsibility ultimately to, be kind to the people who are putting their passion into this type of writing. And consider your own critique of commercial fiction and apply it to fan fiction. What makes one thing any stranger than something that you see in fan fiction? Why would you be willing to accept one thing without question, but another thing doesn't count because it's fan fiction? Again, if you're willing to accept a, quote, reimagining of Peter Pan or anything else that has been done about 50 million times, what makes fan fiction any different? And kind of to bring this to a close, I'm leaving this off with a quote from David Bowie. The only art I'll ever study is stuff that I can steal from. At the end of the day, fan fiction is taking inspiration from original works and building off of those intellectual properties. With that said, though, I mean, that's really the same as any original work as well. Nothing at this point hasn't already been told. And appreciating and committing to not making fun of people who write fan fiction is ultimately a step in the right direction. So I'm going to open it up to Q&A. Does anybody have any questions or anything that you would like to share about your experiences with fan fiction?
Whoop. Hey, this is Jessamine. I would love to hear a little bit more about the unfair DMCA issues because I don't know anything about them and I'm super interested in DMCA stuff generally.
Yeah, absolutely. There have been issues in the past, especially with fanfiction.net. There was a wide sweep of different companies that were putting out DMCAs for any sort of like fan created content related to their intellectual properties. And the way that like fanfiction.net responded to it was just by clearing out all of those pieces of fan fiction, even despite the fact that it was like fair use for creativity. So Archive of Our Own now actually has its own team of lawyers. A lot of like their money goes to their legal team to keep that from happening. And in order to create this archive of fan works that are protected from these DMCAs.
That is very cool of them. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like that's one of the reasons why Archive of Our Own is so popular is the fact that it is very protective of people's rights to create transformative works. All right. Well, if anybody else has any other questions, I will be in the Discord. And thank you all so much for your time.